My mom wants to ruin my wedding. Should I uninvite her? I always imagine my wedding day as perfect, filled with love, laughter, and the people who truly supported me. But as the big day approached, I found myself grappling with a question I never thought I'd ask. Should I uninvite my own mother? It started subtly. Mom would make offhanded comments about my dress, my venue, my fiancé, Eric. Are you sure lace suits your body type? She mused, tilting her head in that way that made me feel like a teenager again, awkward and self-conscious. Then it escalated. She tried to convince me to move the wedding to a different location, one she liked better. You don't want people thinking you're cheap, do you? She'd say, despite the fact that Eric and I had chosen a charming, intimate vineyard that we both adored. At first, I brushed it off as normal mother-of-the-bride behavior. She'd always been controlling, but I thought she just wanted the best for me. Until the night she called me and said, "Sweetheart, I need you to reconsider this whole thing. Eric isn't the right one for you." I nearly dropped my phone. Mom, what? She sighed dramatically. He's nice, but he's not family material. He's not ambitious enough. He doesn't push you to be better. You could do so much more. I gripped the counter, my stomach twisting. Eric makes me happy. That is better. He makes you comfortable, she countered. And marriage isn't about comfort. It's about strategy, about marrying up. And just like that, years of tension between us crystallized into one ugly truth. She didn't want me to be happy. She wanted me to be her. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just nitpicking. She was sabotaging. The next day, I found out she had called my maid of honor, Julia, and tried to convince her to talk me out of the wedding. Tell her she's making a mistake, she'd said. Make her see it before it's too late. Too late for what? Choosing my own life? I felt betrayed, furious, and most of all, exhausted. I couldn't do this anymore. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I called her and said, "Mom, I love you. But if you can't support me, you can't be at my wedding." The silence on the other end stretched forever. You're uninviting your own mother? Her voice cracked. I'm asking you to be in my corner. And if you can't, then yes, I am. She sniffed. I just want what's best for you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, Mom. You want what's best for you. She didn't show up to the wedding. It wasn't easy. I cried the night before, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But when I stood in front of Eric, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us, I knew I had made the right choice. Because my wedding was perfect. Not because it met someone else's expectations, but because it was mine. For weeks after the wedding, I kept expecting my mom to call. Maybe she'd realize she had been wrong, or at least miss me enough to reach out. But the silence was deafening. At first, I tried to push it aside. I had just married the love of my life. I should have been basking in the honeymoon glow. Eric and I spent 10 perfect days in Greece, exploring sun-drenched coastlines and eating our weight in baklava. He never once pressured me to talk about my mom. But he knew. Every time I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message that never came, he'd squeeze my hand. When we got back home, the real weight of her absence hit me. I had grown up in a house where my mother's approval was currency. She was the queen of silent treatment, wielding it like a weapon until I caved and apologized, even when I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong. But this time, I wasn't the one apologizing. And it hurt. I finally broke down one night, curled up on the couch with Julia. What if I was selfish? What if I should have just let her come? Julia sighed, tucking her legs under her. You know, my mom was furious when I moved in with Matt before we got married. She said I was disrespecting my values, that I was rushing things. We didn't talk for 2 months. I frowned. I didn't know that. Yeah. And then one day she showed up at my door with a pie, like nothing happened. Julia smirked. Moms have this weird ability to rewrite history when it suits them. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But weeks turned into months, and my mother's silence stretched on. Then came Christmas. Eric and I had planned to visit his family, but a part of me couldn't shake the thought of my mother sitting alone in the house I had grown up in. So I made the first move. I drove to her house 2 days before Christmas, nerves twisting my stomach into knots. The front yard looked the same, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift, like I was a guest in a place that used to be mine. She was sitting at the dining table, a cup of tea in front of her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You're here," she said, as if I had just walked in from a short trip instead of months of silence. "I am." I hesitated, then sat across from her. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she sighed. "I suppose you expect an apology." I swallowed. "I just want to understand." She looked down at her tea. "I didn't want you to make a mistake." "But it wasn't your decision to make," I said quietly. She flinched, just slightly. Then, softer than I had ever heard her before, she admitted, "I was scared." I blinked. "Of what?" She let out a shaky breath. "Of losing you. Of you needing me less." I felt something in my chest crack open. "Mom, I've always needed you. But I need you as my mom, not as someone controlling my life." Her fingers curled around her teacup. "I don't know how to be that person." The honesty in her voice startled me. For the first time, I saw her not as the overpowering woman who had tried to sabotage my wedding, but as someone who had spent years trying to mold me because she thought she had to. Maybe she'd never say she was sorry. Maybe she'd never be the mother I wished she could be. But she was trying. That was enough. I reached for her hand across the table. "Then let's figure it out together." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she took it. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. Holding my mother's hand that day felt like a victory, but I knew better than to believe everything was magically fixed. Our relationship had been built on control, resentment, and unspoken expectations for years. A single conversation wouldn't undo all of that. But it was a start. Over the next few months, we took small, cautious steps. She didn't suddenly become the warm, supportive mother I had always longed for, and I didn't fully trust that she wouldn't try to undermine me again. But we tried. She started texting me. Short, awkward messages at first. "How is Eric? Hope you're doing well. Made your favorite soup today." It wasn't much, but it was something. I invited her to dinner one evening. She was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. The night of, I stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of pasta while Eric set the table. My nerves buzzed. "What if she picks a fight?" I muttered. Eric walked over, resting a hand on my lower back. "Then we handle it together." I let out a slow breath. That was the difference between him and my mom. He never tried to control me, never made me feel like I had to earn his love. When she arrived, she was stiff and formal, like a guest in a stranger's home rather than my mother visiting her daughter. She brought a bottle of wine. Not my favorite, but the gesture mattered. Dinner was tense but civil. She asked Eric about his work, though I could tell she was holding back her opinions. She didn't mention the wedding, didn't bring up the months we spent not speaking. And maybe that was for the best. But as she sipped her wine, she looked around our apartment, taking in the framed wedding photos on the mantel. Her eyes lingered on a picture of me and my dad, her ex-husband, dancing at the reception. "You didn't invite me," she said quietly. I set my fork down, my appetite vanishing. "You told me not to marry him," I said just as quietly. "You tried to sabotage the whole thing." She flinched. Eric shifted in his seat. "Would you like some more wine, Mrs. Carter?" She blinked at him as if remembering he was there. "No, thank you," she said, a little softer than before. For a while, the only sound was the clinking of silverware. Then, finally, she sighed. "I wasn't fair to you," she admitted. I blinked. That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever gotten from her. I studied her, trying to gauge if she really meant it or if she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. but she looked tired, older, like carrying all that control and resentment had weighed her down. "I just wanted you to have the best life possible," she murmured, swirling her wine. I thought I knew what that looked like. I thought I had to make you see it too." I swallowed. "I know." And in some small way, I believed her. After she left, Eric wrapped his arms around me. "That was interesting." I let out a breathy laugh. "That's one way to put it." He kissed the top of my head. "Do you think she'll ever change?" I leaned into him, staring at the door my mother had just walked out of. "I think she's trying." And maybe for now, that was enough. For a while, things with my mom were manageable. Not warm, not easy, but not the battlefield they had once been. She started calling once a week, usually under the guise of something casual. "Did you see that storm on the news? Your cousin is having a baby. I tried that new Italian place. Overpriced." She never outright said, "I miss you," but I heard it between the lines. And I let myself believe we were making progress. Until the baby shower. It wasn't mine. It was my best friend Julia's. She and her husband were expecting their first child, and I was helping organize the party. My mom, eager to reinsert herself into my life, offered to help. "I'll bring the cake," she insisted. It seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. The day of the shower, she arrived late, grand entrance and all, carrying a massive cake that looked like something straight out of a five-star wedding. White fondant, intricate sugar flowers, gold detailing. Julia's face froze when she saw it. "Oh, wow." I forced a smile. "Mom, I thought we agreed on something simple." She waved a dismissive hand. "This is simple. I wanted to make sure it was elegant. You don't want people thinking it's a tacky little gathering, do you?" And just like that, the old tension surged back. The whole party she took over, directing guests, rearranging decorations, correcting how I handed out gifts. And then, in the middle of small talk with Julia's mother, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I just hope when my daughter has kids, she lets me actually be involved." Silence. I felt every pair of eyes land on me. Eric, standing nearby, instantly put a hand on my back. A silent, "I'm here." I clenched my jaw. "Excuse me?" Mom took a sip of her punch, all innocence. "Well, you did exclude me from your wedding." She smiled, but her voice was sharp. "I'd hate to be cut out of everything important in your life." A slow burn spread in my chest. Eric's fingers pressed gently against my back, a silent warning. "Not here. Not now." So I swallowed my anger. I smiled. I let it go. But later, after the party, I called her. "You always do this," I said, pacing in my kitchen. She sighed. "Do what?" "Undermine me. Guilt trip me. Take something that isn't about you and make it about you. You're being dramatic." I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Mom. You're being manipulative. And I'm not doing it anymore." Silence. I waited for the usual pushback, the emotional blackmail, the "I'm your mother, how dare you." But this time she just said, "I don't know how to be different." Her voice was quieter than I expected. For a long time, I stood there, the phone pressed against my ear. Finally, I said, "Then maybe you should figure it out before I do start a family. Because if you can't, I won't let you do this to my kids." Another silence. Then, finally, a soft, "I'll try." And for the first time, I actually believed her. Months passed. My mom kept to her weekly calls, and I kept my guard up. She hadn't made any major missteps since the baby shower, but I knew better than to trust this piece completely. Then I found out I was pregnant. Eric and I had been trying, but the two pink lines still stunned me. A rush of joy, fear, excitement. It was overwhelming in the best way. But the moment I saw the test, my first thought wasn't about nursery colors or baby names. It was about my mother. Would she respect my boundaries? Or would she use my pregnancy to wedge herself deeper into my life? I waited 3 months before telling her, not because I didn't want her to know, but because I wasn't ready for the inevitable storm that would follow. When I finally called her, she gasped. "Oh, sweetheart." She sounded genuinely thrilled, and for a second I let myself relax. But then she added, "I knew you'd change your mind." My stomach twisted. "Change my mind?" "About pushing me away," she said lightly. "This baby changes everything. You'll need me now." And there it was. She didn't see my pregnancy as a new chapter for me. She saw it as a second chance to control my life. I took a deep breath. "Mom, I want you in my child's life, but things have to be different." She scoffed. "Oh, please, don't start with your boundaries talk again." I clenched my jaw. "It's not a talk, Mom. It's reality. I'm setting clear limits. If you can't respect them, you won't be involved." Silence. Then she laughed. "You actually think you can keep me away from my grandchild?" Her words cut me like a blade. I don't know why I expected anything different. But at that moment, I realized something. My mother wasn't going to change. Not really. She wasn't trying. She was waiting for me to need her, to cave, to let her back in on her terms. And that wasn't happening. Eric found me sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in my lap, hands shaking. "What happened?" he asked softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She thinks this baby is her way back in." His jaw tightened. "You know what we have to do." I did. It wasn't easy. Cutting off a parent never is. But I had a choice. Repeat the cycle, let her steamroll through my life like she always had, or break free, for myself and my child. So I sent her a final message. "Mom, I love you. But until you can respect me as an adult, as a mother, and as someone who makes her own choices, I need space. Please don't contact me until you can do that." She called. I didn't answer. She texted. I didn't reply. She showed up at our apartment once. Eric answered the door and told her firmly, "Not now." And slowly, painfully, I felt the weight of her presence lift. For the first time in my life, I was free. Motherhood changed me. It softened me in ways I didn't expect, but also strengthened my resolve. My daughter, Lily, was the light of my life. She had Eric's eyes, my stubbornness, and a laugh that could melt glaciers. And she would never grow up feeling like she had to earn my love. One night, as I rocked Lily to sleep, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I miss you. And I want to meet my granddaughter, on your terms." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know if she meant it. I didn't know if she could truly change. But I did know this. If I let her back in, it would be different this time. Because I was different. And I wasn't afraid anymore. I stared at the message for what felt like hours. For months, I had imagined this moment. What I'd say if my mother ever reached out. Part of me had been certain she never would. But now, here it was. Eric found me in the nursery, rocking Lily. He glanced at my phone. "She finally reached out?" I nodded. "She says she wants to meet Lily. On my terms." He studied me carefully. "Do you believe her?" I swallowed hard. I don't know. I had spent my whole life hoping my mother would change. Every time I thought she might, she proved me wrong. But this time, I wasn't a scared little girl desperate for her approval. I was a mother now. I had something to protect. Finally, I sighed. "I'll meet her. Alone." Eric nodded. "And if she crosses a line?" "Then it's over. For good." I chose a quiet cafe in the middle of the afternoon when it wouldn't be crowded. I didn't want an audience if things went south. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. When she saw me, she smiled cautiously. "Hi, sweetheart." I sat across from her. Hi, Mom. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence stretching between us. Then she sighed. I know I've lost your trust. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I meant what I said. I want to be part of your life. And Lily's. I studied her. On my terms? She nodded. Yes. I hesitated. Mom, you've said that before, and every time you end up trying to control me again. She flinched but didn't argue. I know. That surprised me. She took a deep breath. I started seeing a therapist. My eyebrows lifted. You did? She nodded. It's hard. I don't like talking about things, but she's helped me understand why I've been the way I am, why I tried so hard to control you. She looked down at her tea. It wasn't about you. It was about me, about my own fears, about not knowing how to love without controlling. I swallowed hard. I had waited my whole life to hear something like that. But words weren't enough. I want to believe you, I said carefully. But I need to see it, Mom. I need to know you'll respect my boundaries this time. She nodded. I understand. Then after a pause, she asked, Can we start slow? I hesitated. Then finally I said, You can meet Lily, but it's going to be on my terms. And if I see even one sign of you overstepping, we're done. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'll take whatever you're willing to give me. A week later, she came over. She was nervous. I could see it in the way she fidgeted with the sleeves of her cardigan, the way she glanced at me for approval before reaching for Lily. But she asked permission. And when I handed Lily to her, she didn't try to take over. She just held her, tears slipping down her cheeks. She's beautiful, she whispered. For the first time in a long time, I felt something in my heart shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For weeks, things were good. My mother stayed within the boundaries I set. She visited once a week, never unannounced. She didn't question my parenting choices. She didn't undermine me. And for a moment, I thought, maybe this time will be different. I should have known better. It started small, subtle. A comment here, a lingering look there. Oh, you're still not letting her cry it out? You know, I never used all these new parenting trends and you turned out fine. I ignored it, gave her the benefit of the doubt. Then, one afternoon, she offered to babysit so Eric and I could have a night out. It was the first time I'd let her watch Lily alone. I hesitated but agreed, hoping it would show I was willing to trust her. That night, when we got home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Mom? I called, setting down my purse. No answer. I walked into the nursery. Empty. The crib was untouched. A chill spread through my body. Eric appeared behind me. Where's Lily? I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Oh, sweetheart, relax. Lily's fine. Where is she? My voice was sharp, panic surging through me. I took her to my house. She was fussing, and I thought, I didn't hear the rest. I was already running to the door, Eric close behind me. When we got to my mother's house, I pounded on the door. She answered with Lily in her arms, looking completely unbothered. Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? I screamed. She blinked at me like I was overreacting. I was just trying to help. You and Eric deserved a break, so I brought her here for the night. My hands shook. You took my daughter without my permission. Do you even hear yourself? Oh, stop being dramatic. She's my granddaughter. What's the difference? Eric stepped in, voice dangerously low. The difference is consent. You don't get to make that decision. Ever. She scoffed. You're overreacting. I raised you. I know what I'm doing. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Nothing had changed. She hadn't learned. She hadn't respected me. She had just been waiting for an opportunity to take control again. I reached for Lily. Give her to me. She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Now, Mom. My voice left no room for argument. Finally, she handed Lily over, and the moment I had her in my arms, I stepped back. This was the last time you'll ever see her, I said, my voice shaking with fury. We're done. Her face paled. You don't mean that. But I did. I turned away, Eric's hand on my back, and walked out the door without looking back. She called. She texted. She begged. I blocked her number. Some wounds don't heal. Some relationships aren't meant to be salvaged. And some people will never change, no matter how much you want them to. And I refused to let my daughter grow up in the same cycle I barely escaped from. So I chose peace. And I never spoke to my mother again.